first event in partnership with the Chifley Research Centre, and our guest is its brand new, or sort of not quite brand new anymore, Executive Director Emma Dawson. And so this is beginning, we hope, of a wonderful future for the Labor Academy around Australia, just not within Victoria. And welcome to Michael Cowling over there in Adelaide. I hope it's warmer in Adelaide than it is here. Tonight, we're going to be looking at the productivity roundtable. And I think, first of all, we should make our acknowledgements to the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're meeting or from which we're connecting, and acknowledge that the ownership of that land was never ceded. And we honour the ancestors and the continuing community leaders of the original peoples of this land. I'm going to introduce Emma Dawson and ask her to start off telling us about this productivity roundtable, about which there was quite a lot of cynicism and an even greater amount of ignorance coming from the media. And so we've asked Emma to tell us what we should really think about it, what it might actually have been trying to do, and what the big issues are for this country in terms of reworking our economy so that it starts to work for everybody, just not for a few people and for those who own property. So, Emma, thank you very much. Off you go.
Thanks, Janet. Thank you for asking me to talk to Labor Academy again about this topic. And it's so lovely to be with you for the first time from my new position as the Executive Director of the Chifley Research Centre. And I'm sorry, you can hear scrabbling around in the background there, my dog, who is also called Chifley, which is slightly embarrassing, but completely unintended. I am joining you from the lands of the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present. This is an important conversation, and one that I think as Labor members and Labor supporters we really need to grapple with, and we need to put aside that natural scepticism is good, cynicism is not always helpful, and try to embrace what I think is a genuine opportunity for meaningful reform. So I'll talk a little bit about what how that's been received so far and what I think comes next. So shortly after the election, the Treasurer, I think on the night of the election, said it's the productivity challenge for the next term of government that's going to be so important to us. And instantly, and then shortly after that, the Prime Minister announced a productivity roundtable. The Treasurer then, a week later, kind of redefined that a little bit about more of an economic reform roundtable, but certainly the initial focus was on productivity growth, and there's good reason for that, which I'll come to. I think what's important to say up front to contextualise this is if we're going to undertake the kind of meaningful economic restructuring that we need in order to redress some of the growing class divides, which are currently presenting themselves as generational inequality, and again, I'll get to that shortly as well, and to rebuild the social infrastructure that was put in place after the Second World War and has been so badly degraded since, an argument Janet and I made in our collection of essays, What Happens Next, 5 years ago, then we need to bring our best selves to this conversation. Labor has a strong majority. It is likely to be in majority government for 2 terms. A lot of the more egregious populists in the last parliament have been removed on both right and left. And I think the Australian people showed with their vote in May that they want to give an opportunity to a government to restore some opportunity, some fairness and some equality and bring back the fair go. And this is absolutely the first step in doing that. Now, I will talk a little bit about the role of the Productivity Commission to start with and why productivity, which often is a word that scares many of us on the left and particularly working people in the union movement tend to hear it as, well, you want us to work harder for less, when actually it should be and is, in theory, the opposite. Productivity growth is, in fact, the engine that has lifted living standards around the world for the last 200 years. So when we can produce more goods and services with less effort, then our living standards rise. We don't have to work as hard for the things that make life easier to live. And so, for example, we can say that 200 years ago, the average person had to work around 6 to 8 hours to afford a loaf of bread. Today, that's more like 10 minutes. And so that's really what productivity is about. It's about producing more goods and services with less input and making the cost of living come down for more people. The distribution of that's what's critical, and I will dwell on that today. So this is why the claims that when productivity rises, economies grow, wages rise, societies become more prosperous, and therefore living standards improve. That's why it's such a central focus of economic reform. There's obviously a bit of cynicism around that because it doesn't just automatically happen. And so there is concern on parts of the left, including Labor members, people in the social services sector, civil society, those of us that work particularly with people at the lower end of the economic distribution. There's a concern that productivity is the wrong focus, that somehow it's masking an agenda that could ask us all to do more rather than less, that it could deepen inequality, that it could lead to damaging economic growth that harms the planet and doesn't take account of the nature of finite resources and so on. I think some of those concerns and criticisms are understandable, but they miss the point. This is the first step in a large national conversation about the kind of economy we need to have to support the kind of country we want to live in and the kind of future we want to leave our children. So identifying the barriers to growth, working out how to remove them, and how to move into a phase of sustainable growth is really critical work to set off this conversation. I would highlight that, of course, not all growth is equal. We do have finite planetary resources, finite ecological resources, natural energy resources in terms of minerals and other such earth-based resources. But there are some things that don't have a natural limit, such as human ingenuity and innovation, the things we can invent for ourselves, sunlight, for example. So it's a great example of moving away from a finite source of energy to an infinite wealth of energy, and that kind of growth absolutely can be sustained. So the real question, though, the question for those of us that are Labourists, that are progressives, that are social democrats or democratic socialists, those on the left, the real question that should concern all of us is what happens next, Janet, to quote our book. Once we lift productivity, how are we going to ensure that those gains are distributed? Where's the prosperity going to be invested? Who's going to benefit from those returns? So the initial focus of the roundtable was very much about bringing people from across the political spectrum together. Yes, there are a lot of representatives of business at that table. There are a lot of representatives of big money at that table. There were also the union movement. There were representatives of civil society, and there were sorry, my naughty dog is chewing on my new desk. And there were economists and people that were very much on the inside of these conversations, and that was deliberate. It was a small cabinet room discussion. There were only about 25 people invited. And really that's about saying if we're going to undertake big economic reform, we're going to need to tackle some of those natural divisions early on and ensure that we bring everybody to the table as far as possible. We're never going to, a lot of talk about consensus at that table. Of course, you don't achieve real reform through seeking consensus. It will always be contested, but ensuring that people feel heard and included from day one, I think, is really critically important. So if we come to those critical questions, where does the productivity benefit go? How do we ensure that it's shared fairly? How do we ensure it's invested where it needs to be invested? Who's going to benefit from the returns? These are actually questions of fiscal policy. And they go way beyond the remit of the Productivity Commission or of the interests of any private sector group. Fiscal policy, of course, is the purview of the government, and not of the Reserve Bank, which looks after monetary policy, but of the elected government of the day. And so if we want our relatively newly elected majority Labor government, biggest majority since 1943, to be emboldened to undertake economic change, then I think it behooves all of us to bring our best selves to that conversation, to try to leave the cynicism aside, and rather than try to shut down the voices we disagree with, to debate them and to defeat them. Just give me one moment here, please. I'll be right.
Emma's dealing with her domestic issues, dog and daughter.
My apologies. I think my daughter has her headphones in and she's singing rather loudly, so I've just shut them. She couldn't hear me telling
Couldn't hear her
to keep it down, but that's all I could hear was a little bit of Sabrina Carpenter in the background. Anyway, I apologise and I shall continue. So these are questions for fiscal policy. So, of course, as I just said, not all growth is equal. Growth that comes at the expense of natural resources, that depletes the planet, is not sustainable, and growth that is hoarded by a few while inequality worsens won't lift living standards. It won't do what the Treasurer and the Prime Minister say they want it to do. Poverty and inequality will only grow if we simply focus on growth and then leave distribution to the market. Markets don't distribute in a fair way. Governments must intervene to ensure that growth is properly shared. There's nothing radical about that. That's what good social democratic governments have always done. And that's what we need to be focused on as we enter into this period of economic reform. The roundtable was not the end, it was simply the beginning. So let's look at housing as an example of how the market won't do that. The market has delivered us skyrocketing house prices, declining affordability, and even though they are now stepping up to the supply challenge, the kinds of properties they're building are not targeted where they need to be targeted. They're high-end residential apartment buildings aimed at downsizers with significant cash, because that's what the market will deliver. I think the best example of the market and how it fails to achieve the goals of social democracy and of good democratic government is the story I read in the New York Times last week about what's happened to Disneyland. And I'm sorry, I'm going to digress a bit here because I think it's a really interesting case study. It was a story of a woman who's gone to Disneyland all her life. She's now a grandmother. She's got mobility issues. She lives in the southern states of America, very working class family, mixed race family, in and out of employment. But Disneyland was the thing that she loved as a child. And now she wants to take her grandchildren. She has been forced to save for 3 years, something like 3 years, to be able to afford a weekend at Disneyland with those grandchildren. And even when she gets there, now she's having to stay not in the hotel on site that she stayed in with her family in the 1970s, but quite a distance away in a cheaper option. She has to queue all day to get on the ride, and so rather than move through the park equally with other people while she's standing in a hot sunny queue in a scooter with her little grandchildren for 3 hours, people are able to zip right past her by paying extra money and jumping to the front of the queue. Those same people are able to stay on site because they'll pay the premium rates for the hotel in the park. And so we've got a very bifurcated offering of Disney World. And Abigail Disney, who's a very woke billionaire, has responded to that piece in the New York Times and said, this is not what my father and my uncle wanted to create. That is an example of the market saying, well, the middle class in America no longer has the mass spending power that it had in the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so the market's response is to start tailoring products to the very wealthy. And that's what the market will do. It will look for where the return will come and it will deliver to those people. So it's absolutely essential that we intervene in the market and in growth to ensure that it's directed where it needs to be. In Australia, that's most evident in the housing system at the moment. History shows this, that if we do let it rip, it's the most vulnerable who pay if we let the market rip. And periods of rapid growth throughout history, and Janet knows this better than I, have sometimes brought really broad prosperity, but only when it's been supported by strong social policies. So if we look at the post-war decades, when governments invested in housing and education and health, and contrast that with the 90s and 2000s, when those investments really started to decline and we moved to a much more supply-side economic approach, then inequality surged. Now, it's important to note here the difference between poverty, absolute poverty, and inequality. And Margaret Thatcher used to, when I was a child, say, well, what's wrong with the left is they would rather have everyone down here with the gap much lower than up here with the gap wider. And she felt the gap wider was better if it meant people were lifted from the bottom. Completely ignored the fact that people experience their financial fortunes relatively to others. So you might be doing a lot better off than your great-grandmother, but you're not comparing yourself to your great-grandmother, you're comparing yourself to your neighbours and your peers. Inequality, my point is much more damaging to society, to trusting social cohesion, than is absolute poverty. Having said that, one of the claims in the recent productivity papers was that Australia has had a fairly consistent level of poverty over the last 30 years. It hasn't really got much worse. It is, though, stubbornly between 10 and 15%. And in a country as wealthy as ours, that's pretty indefensible. And it's hard to go back sort of much beyond 1990, late 80s, 1990 really, when the Hilda survey was launched, to find accurate and comparable national or nationwide poverty data or relative poverty data. But the Henderson inquiry in 1966 did an assessment of Melbourne and found that the rate of poverty in Melbourne in the 60s was 6.25%. So it's at least twice, if not up to 3 times today, what it was during those years when we ensured that productivity growth was more fairly shared amongst working people and families and not hoarded by profits. All of these issues are what comes next after the roundtable, and these are the things that we really need to focus on if we're going to ensure that this economic reform process delivers not just aggregate growth, but improvements in living standards. And that's the main message that I want to get through today. The cynicism around amongst many people around the roundtable and the process so far is that we're not talking about distribution enough, or that we're assuming that productivity growth will trickle down, and of course it won't. I do not believe for a second there's a person within the current federal government that doesn't know that, or a person that believes that the market will just naturally deliver it. It is going to be the challenge. The next point of this process will be the challenge when we come to start talking about the distributional impacts. So already we've had the ideas put forward at the roundtable, such as, for example, a cash flow tax on business, on large businesses, which would mean rather than taxing their profits, we're taxing their cash flow, which effectively means they will be unable to avoid that tax unless they are going to invest in so that they can reduce their tax take under a cash flow tax system by investing in productive capacity in the economy rather than hoarding the profits. And that will give you an example, an understanding of why the Business Council of Australia last night came out so vociferously against a cash flow tax, because it is not as easy to game as a straight company tax. Company tax rate. Company tax cut was put on the table. Fairly indefensible, I would say, at this point in time, unless there was to be an acceptance of those other measures like a cash flow tax that would ensure that businesses start to invest. There is a widespread recognition amongst the people around that round table that investment is too low, that business investment is too low, and that's a large reason for the decline in productivity. What there isn't is an explicit acknowledgement by anybody in that room that that's largely due to the choices and behaviour of big business in Australia. That when they do, and we've seen this in America, when large businesses get a tax cut in this day and age, they tend to put it into share buybacks or executive payouts. They don't tend to reinvest in the business, and they certainly don't reinvest in a country like ours when they're multinational corporations. So we really do It's not just about punishing the wealthy and giving to the poor. It's about incentivizing the kind of investment we need in the next economy, in the post-carbon economy, in ensuring that we're putting the profits that we make from our natural resources, from our ingenuity, from our hard work, into creating not just opportunity, but security, security against the climate crisis, but also creating the new jobs that are going to drive prosperity into the future. I've got to leave some time for questions, so I won't go on too long, but I did want to talk a little bit about one of the big things that came out of the roundtable and that a lot of people are very happy about is a recognition that there's a generational inequity at play here, that young people in Australia today simply don't have the same economic opportunities as their forebears, that they don't feel that they will ever have a secure life. They're putting off having children because they can't afford to buy a home, and that this is, in the words of Ken Henry at the tax summit I put on with Per Capita in February, an act of intergenerational bastardry. This is true to a certain extent, but the generational framework really masks what most of us from our own political tradition would recognise as a class divide. There are actually many millennials today that are earning more than their parents did at a similar age, although housing affordability is a huge sticking problem. And many of them will go on to inherit significant wealth as well. And that will just entrench a significant and growing class divide in this country. It's not boomers' fault. The generational lens is useful because it enables us to bring people into the conversation that otherwise wouldn't give a damn because class inequality doesn't bother them. But when it's their own kids, they start to worry about it. So it's a useful lens in that regard. But really what we're facing here is the entrenchment of a class system in a country that has long prided itself on not having one. Now, we've always had one, but it's never been anywhere near as bad as many of our old countries from which we all come. And if we don't do something to correct this distribution of wealth and this intergenerational transfer of wealth, then we really will find it very, very difficult to undo that. And when people don't feel that they have the opportunity to build a life through their own hard work, and that they get an appropriate reward for effort, then they lose trust in the system. But as I said, it's not individual boomers to blame. Older people did what they were told to do. They enrolled, they stayed on at school longer than their parents did. They got postgraduate qualifications even into their 20s and 30s. They bought a house young and they worked hard to pay it off, and they eschewed overseas holidays. And guess what? It worked. They got ahead. They got Medicare in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and then superannuation, and they have built some wealth. Many young people have done exactly what they were told to do, and it hasn't worked for them. And that's where the anger comes from. But what a lot of young people failing to see is it's not because of some luck of when you were born or harder work afforded to the baby boomers or greed. It's to do with policy changes that removed those ladders of opportunity, as one of our former leaders used to say. We probably shouldn't quote Mark Latham, but it was a pithy catch cry. But certainly that social infrastructure that allowed people to build a good life. And so it's not too late for us in this country to return to that. But it absolutely must be the next focus of what happens next after the productivity roundtable. So there's a long and ongoing process from here. The Productivity Commission's still taking submissions on its proposals to government. I think many on the left are too hard on the Productivity Commission. Yes, it was set up by Peter Costello. Yes, it has quite a limited remit. It's defined within a very supply-side economic framework of productivity growth. But if you look at what it's been doing under Danny Elwood over the last 18 months, it is trying to grapple with things like the measurement of the care economy and valuing unpaid labour and trying to broaden that as much as it can. It does what it says on the tin. It measures productivity, it predicts trends, and it gives advice. The real work starts when this initial phase is over and we have to start looking at how we're going to tax hoarded wealth. there's a big cry at the moment about taxing unrealised gains. But as Chris Richardson said on social media the other day, and he's certainly no bleeding heart lefty, we have a almost unprecedented situation in this country where so much of our national wealth is tied up in non-liquid assets, in land or in superannuation, that it is being hoarded and not reinvested. So we have to think differently about how we access that wealth and invest it in our commonwealth and our future. We need to think really carefully about what incentives we're giving business to invest, and not simply constantly reward them for laziness, and not be scared by this notion that if we ask them to pay a decent amount in taxes to access our natural resources, that there'll be some sort of capital flight. We're not a finance-based economy like the UK, for example, where that it could actually be quite damaging. If the mining sector doesn't want to work here, then there will be other companies that come and dig up the stuff because it's in our land. We do need fiscal reform. We need to invest in human and social capital. We need to further lift the wages and the valuation of the care and services economy, and we need to diversify our industrial economy so that we're not just reliant on digging stuff up and shipping it overseas, and that when we do continue to dig up those new rare earth minerals that'll fuel the post-carbon economy, that we get much fairer returns on their extraction than we have on fossil fuels. So distribution, it's all about distribution. And that doesn't just mean welfare. It doesn't just mean cash payments. In fact, that's, I would argue, the least efficient form of distribution. Distribution means looking where to invest. It means government being involved in industry policy to identify opportunities. It means universal services. It means providing people with education and lifelong skills learning. And it means skills education. And it means that we meet people where they are, and we give them the opportunity to fulfil their greatest potential, because that's not only best for individual citizens, but it's how we're going to grow an economy and a future that offers younger generations of Australia the same fair go that previous generations had. I could go on, but we've hit the half-hour mark, and I think I'll shut up and take some questions and have a chat.
Thank you, Emma, very much. Now, Peter Fitzgerald already has come up with a thought and a question, so I'll give him the honour of starting us all off.
Yeah, if I can kick off. Emma, terrific for the briefing. Thank you. Just a question. So I'm both an economist and a thinker of fiscal policy, business policy, but also social policy. And I like what you say about universal services, health, education, transport. And I'm going to jump to a thing that says, is it too late for us to have a sovereign fund and put all of our rare mineral taxes into it and raise resource rent tax? But my first question was, has there really been a fall in productivity and investment? Or is this just the Business Council trying to get up pro-business policies? So I sat through some McKinsey presentations of 25 slides of the great evil of falling productivity, but they refused to have any measure for health and education. And so, as you know, over the course of 10 or 20 years, foreign students, students that have been taught at university have gone up by 20, 30, 40%, but not teachers. So there's been productivity. In hospitals, we now have productivities built into the pricing of hospital admissions across the country. But McKinsey won't measure the non-market economy, and therefore says non-market services are not subject to productivity, which is the complete and utter opposite of what is both witnessed and what is achieved.
You're absolutely right.
But the question, how do you feel about a sovereign fund to sort of pump the free goods, health, education, environment, transport?
Look, I think, Peter, about 5 years ago, I did a piece for the Tax Policy Journal, and my calculations at the time showed that if we had taxed just our natural gas exports at the same rate that Norway does, if we'd done that just since 2000, we'd by now have a sovereign wealth fund sufficient to meet the full Gonski education funding requirement and set up a future fund that would fund it in perpetuity. Yep. So yes, is the short answer. We mustn't make that same mistake again. We must not allow multinational companies to come here and mine the rare earth minerals that are going to drive the post-carbon economy without paying appropriate resource rent taxes to us. And then, yes, there is a strong argument to say that should be invested in a way that can provide for the education and skills development of future generations or other worthy social goods. It is completely insane that a country as resource rich as us does not already have such a sovereign wealth fund. So yes, the best time to do it would have been 40 years ago, and the next best time
is now. But I would say resource rent tax, we've calculated it wrongly. We shouldn't let it continue.
No.
We're just I think the numbers are such that if you'd got 10 or 20% of the natural gas exported, you could pay off all of the HEX debt
very easily. Very easily, and that was an issue that was. I mean, Ross Garno and Rod Sims took that to the roundtable. There was a support for either a carbon tax or a beefed up resource rent tax. Of course, the Business Council pushes instantly back on all of this stuff. And I think, to go to your original question, is there really a fall in productivity? Sometimes that is. We hear it as an excuse from business. Well, we can't lift wages because there's been no productivity growth, right? So that it's your fault. When you actually break it down, and I'm not telling Peter anything he doesn't know here, this is a bit of a Dorothy Dixer, I think. Labour, there's been nothing wrong with labour productivity in this country for the last 30 years. It's multi-factor productivity that's been at fault. Am I wrong, Peter? Yeah. And business just doesn't invest. And I would argue that Australia's business leaders are amongst the laziest in the developed world. And when it was put to them at the round table that, for example, they might consider a cash flow tax in return for a cut on the company tax rate. No, we couldn't possibly do that. Why? Because it's impossible for them to avoid a cash flow tax without investing in the economy. When it was put to them that they might, if they're a business that makes over 500 million a year, they might either invest in training their own staff or pay a 1.5% levy to allow the government to train their own staff. No, that's the end of the world. So business in this country is constantly saying, give me more concessions, give me more tax cuts, allow me to hoard more wealth, and they consistently fail to invest. And last time there was a round of business tax cuts, we saw no growth in multi-factor productivity or business investment. It all went into share buybacks, which enrich the existing shareholders, and executive bonuses. And that's the mindset that needs to change. And I would argue, now that this conversation's been kicked off and they've been at the table, it's a way of putting them on notice. So you cannot front up here and talk about the need for productivity growth and then refuse to do your part.
Yeah.
Tracy Davis wants to know quickly, did it really come out of the productivity summit that we should tax empty bedrooms?
No, absolute nonsense.
That's the first
complete misinformation, as is the idea that there's going to be a nighttime curfew on drivers aged over 60. This is modern misinformation designed to scare people. It's nonsense.
Can I just intervene from an historical point of view that what you can see long term is an extraordinarily incompetent, lazy and stupid upper class in this country, and that it's the long-term consequences of a schooling system which they developed their own private schooling system to control caste boundaries, and within that to continue to foster this sort of complacency. Because what's stunning about the performance of the Australian elite, and the person to really first to call this out was what's his name from Adelaide, the wonderful historian. I'll come to you in a minute at this age. In that the quality of the elites in Australia has always been very poor, unimaginative, lazy. Let's get ideas from overseas, and if we do something ourselves, we'll sell it overseas. We'll get some Americans to buy our ideas. That's an extraordinary. They all want to go down to the beach.
Yeah.
sit in Portsea and drink
A
wine.
lucky country run by second-rate people who
Very
share
second-rate. Yeah, and until we get rid of that conception, but we created this by allowing such a class-divided education system, and it's left us now with, we've just gone from 93rd on the economic complexity table down to 105 out of 135.
Mm.
It's unbelievable. And all of that is the lack and inability to capture and develop human capital.
Sure. That's right. I said to I was speaking at the Anglicare conference this morning with Danielle Wood from the Productivity Commission, and of course she has to be much more careful in her remarks than I do. So,
yeah.
But she did not disagree with me when I said that actually the captains of industry in this country are killing their own. They're destroying their own interests. If they actually believed in the theories they spout of growth and investment and how that builds prosperity, then they would abide by it. They don't seem to even understand. And their behaviour is not just killing growth, it's killing capitalism and it's killing democracy.
Yes. Yeah. We've got a question from Mitch Bridges.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm a social worker here in Albury-Wodonga. Look, I'm a bit of a politics nerd. Obviously, I'm here in this room, but a lot of the conversations about politics that I'm having with some of my co-workers, that it's not about fiscal policy. It's not about there's I don't have many economists in my circle. So, is there anything that's kind of come out from the Productivity Commission that that like people like me that work in industries like this can get excited about?
Yeah, I think there is, and there will be more. And I will share with Janet so she can share with all of you some of the material that came out of the Anglicare conference conversation this morning, because that was very much people on the front lines of social services and service delivery, as you are. There is a recognition, I think, and it was a topic of conversation this morning, that actually the non-profit social services, charity sector are tied up in a lot of bureaucratic compliance requirements that actually take the time and money that is very scarce in the sector away from helping people and into that kind of ticking red tape boxes. And so there is a focus on reducing some of that. And that has been received by some on the left as, it's deregulation, but actually what it means for people like you is simplifying processes so that you can spend more time, effort and energy on helping people rather than demonstrating how you've helped people or why you should be allowed to continue helping people or continue to be funded to help people. So those are the very prosaic things. And a lot of this has been described by cynics as, that's just low-hanging fruit. It's actually really tough stuff to do, right? It's important. And it means that we can free up a lot more resources, human and capital resources, that are already allocated to people that are vulnerable and need support, and make sure it gets to them. So there's that element. But I think more broadly, there is a growing recognition that the growth, and certainly among the public, right, that the growth of inequality in this country, so more and more people needing help at the bottom and not getting enough, and more people having far too much more than they need at the top, is really unsustainable. And there was some grudging acceptance, I think, even from some of the more self-interested attendees at that roundtable, that can't continue. And the shift is starting to occur because even those who may have done very well themselves out of growing inequality and neoliberalism and supply-side economics are starting to, and even if they can look after their own kids, they are worried that society might break down and their house might get broken into, right? So they do get the connection between the loss of social cohesion and trust in democracy. And so they're the arguments that we need to keep making. And I think there's a growing awareness as well that a lot of the work, the kind of work that you do, the jobs that have been so undervalued in our economic system for so long are foundational to how we live. And there was a really sudden and obvious spike in that awareness during COVID. And I think much as many people would like us to forget that we all looked up and went, oh, it's the nurses and the food delivery drivers and the childcare workers that are important, not the hedge fund managers. We had that wrong. They'd like us to forget that. But I think that sense remains, and it was certainly part of the conversation, and even the Productivity Commission's shift to rethink how it measures care and services. That is a significant shift in itself that's occurred under Danielle Wood's tenure, and I give her a lot of credit for that.
Kimberly, you've been sitting there patiently.
Thank you, Janet, and thank you so much, Emma, for taking the time to speak to us tonight. As some of you will know, I'm a musician and a leader within the MEAA, which is the arts union. One topic that's just always on our agenda at the moment is AI. And I know that in the Interim Productivity Commission's report, there was a suggestion that copyright be suspended on Australian works, which certainly gave us a hell of a shock. Because we are in a situation where, even though copyright law doesn't extend beyond Australian shores, a lot of these engines are being trained on our works internationally.
Yeah, that's right.
So we're kind of in a perplexed position at the moment, in that we are experiencing a downturn in in demand for our service. We're seeing, and certainly many of my peers are just sort of saying, well, actually, it's like someone's just sucked the productivity out of our section, and just kind of moved it somewhere else.
Yeah.
And, I'm just wondering if you've got any thoughts or suggestions around what needs to be done to maintain the creative community in Australia, and also just a consideration that a lot of that, of the sort of the workforce, a lot of workers don't earn a great deal, and they would be sitting in that 10 to 15% down the bottom of the economic scale. Just interested in some thoughts and suggestions you've got.
This is, in fact, as most of you know me by now, know that I'm a real optimist, and I'm a determined optimist when it comes to economic reform and how we can support people. The fate of the creative industries is an area where I'm actually genuinely getting scared in this country. I think the recommendations around removing copyright and letting AI rip were ignorant. That's the most polite way I can put it. I'm not as down on the Productivity Commission as a lot of people, but that was an absolute howler, right? And it's happening at the same time that we're seeing a general devaluing of the cultural across the country. So we're losing the Australian Meanjin's been shut down, right? Because from a purely financial decision, it's $220,000 a year. It's nonsense. So and the rise of AI, and there is a real tension around AI and technology around that roundtable, but also within the government. So there'll be some that say we can't stand in its way, it's got all this potential, and then a lot of others, including myself, that are very aware of what we risk losing if we let it rip, that will never be replaced. There's nothing creative about artificial intelligence. It doesn't create. It repeats, it regurgitates. Maybe it'll get to the point where it creates.
It's theft.
Yeah.
Prudhomme said that property is theft, AI is theft.
That's right. And it's also incredibly intrusive. Like the market, it doesn't have a conscience. It's not a human mind. I think the threats, I think the potential benefits, sure, they're great. But we shouldn't get carried away. It's like every other big industrial transformation. There's always the zealots that goes, right, let's throw everything we knew out and throw in with this new thing. Never in human history has that proved to be a good way of adapting to a new technology. Do I have any answers? I think that we do need to consider, we absolutely need to cooperate with international jurisdictions around copyright and around protecting the intellectual property of creatives. the average income of someone who identifies as a creative in this country is $44,000 a year. That includes income from non-creative pursuits. So that's not saying they're only making $44,000 out of their writing or their art or their music. They're making $44,000 out of their writing or out of their music and the waitressing or the admin work that they're doing on the side. And the median wage in this country is 55. The average is 96. So there is no room for artists to take a further cut or for creatives to take a further cut. And we will lose what it means to be human. And what it means to make genuine progress, if productivity is about progress, if we sacrifice that to the gods of AI. So, yes, there are a few people in government and certainly in business that don't get that and would let it rip. But I would say there are many of us that do, and many in the government that do. And there is a very live debate going on around that issue at the moment. It's probably the most unsettled and the most critical that we don't throw things out now that we can never recover. I've only used ChatGPT once, and it was to prepare for this presentation this morning because I was asked to join Danielle very late, and I didn't have time to do the analysis that I wanted to do. So I got ChatGPT to help me, and I asked it if it could show me the distribution of productivity growth over the decades, and particularly focused on the Howard and Costello years. It gave me the wrong answer. And I got into an argument with it because it compared real productivity growth with nominal wages and made it look like the Howard and Costello years were an absolute boon for workers.
Oh, really? What a surprise.
Yes. So, it's only as good as the information fed into it. And when there's a lot of propaganda going into it, similarly, there was an example last week where someone asked it two identical questions about what the starting salary for an engineer with X qualifications should be. And the only thing they changed in the prompts was the gender pronouns. And for the man, it recommended a 25% higher starting salary than the woman. So, AI is just going to entrench all the worst aspects of our society unless we push back against it. That was a really long, waffly answer, Kimberly's way of saying I don't have any answers, but God, we've got to get in the fight.
And just if you are of mind to chat about it, or you're talking to someone, please drop me a line because we
catch up. I'd like that.
That would be great. We actually had a delegation. The MEA had a delegation to Canberra last week to talk about a Stop AI Theft campaign.
And I'm meeting with what's the UK's equivalent union? It's
the British Musicians Union.
That's it.
One of them. Yeah.
And another one, I'm meeting with two of their delegates in London next month. So I'd love to catch you before I go if I could.
That would be great. Thanks, Emma.
Andrew Stevens, you're sitting there patiently. Your question, please.
My tea's gone cold. I've been talking so much.
Andrew, do you want to speak? You need to switch your microphone on. Andrew, there we go.
Now I'm ready to go. I was just saying I was quite happy to sit there and listen to a fellow musician. Not that I'm quite in Kimberly's league, but nevertheless. Anyway, what I really wanted to ask about was the emergence of the MAGA sort of Trump type right all across the Western world. And reading a book by Bernie Sanders a year or so ago, he actually dared to put in words what some of us had thought in our minds, and that is that we're partly to blame on the left.
Of course we are.
And that is that our dalliance with neoliberalism, where we forgot about distribution, he sort of talks about Bill Clinton in particular, but we could talk about Roger Douglas in New Zealand. We could talk about Paul Keating here, and so it goes. His point was that the fact that the US economy might in aggregate be the best it's ever been doesn't mean terribly much to a person who's unemployed in Detroit and who sees no future.
Well, let alone to a person who's not unemployed but has to work 3 jobs just to pay the rent on a studio apartment. I'd push back gently on putting Paul Keating in the same category. I would. I know there's some of us in the Labor Party that blame him for this. All of the data, all of the evidence shows that we were very, very lucky to have a Labor government at that time of ascendant neoliberalism around the world. That yes, we adopted as all of the developed economies of the world did, a supply-side approach to economics, but we did ameliorate it significantly here with social wages and with investment in communities. And so, sure, I think particularly in the last term of that Hawke-Keating government, there were some things that went too far, but I wouldn't put him by any means in the same category as the Thatcher Reaganism New Zealand. Yes, the left is to blame. We, particularly Labor Party, the Democrats, you can kind of go, well, they came from a different tradition. But in the UK and Australia, which are the two countries I am a citizen of and most involved in, we have Labor parties, and they came from a Labor movement, and they were started by working people who were fighting for a fair return on their effort. And so the fact that too many of us in the particularly 90s, 2000s, Clinton, Blair, third way era acquiesced on that front and went, oh, okay, we won't even try to fight it, is absolutely why there is so much distress amongst those communities today. They don't expect anything else of the right. They expect us to do better, right? They vote us in when they want us to fix things for them, and we must do so. And we can't just fob them off with a few tax cuts here and we have to. And the book, as Janet knows, the book I've been trying to write for years, but it's actually starting to move again now, is called Not for Patching, based on the Beveridge quote from 1945, that the economy, we can't just keep patching up this system. We have to reinstate a social democratic Keynesian economic system that rewards people and shares those spoils. The right do what they said they were always going to do. They have reversed many of those social democratic gains quite deliberately because their concern is the freedom of capital, not the freedom of people. Their concern is the building of wealth, not the building of opportunity. We're meant to be on the other side. And it's time we vociferously and explicitly started to reclaim that ground.
Thank you.
Emma, thank you. Now, no one else has got their hand up, but I'm just wondering if I could ask Peter Fitzgerald to have a reflection on AI, because this is something he knows quite a lot about.
Can I just say one thing, Janet, because there's a question from Wendy. Does the commitment of taxing super accounts over 3 million seem to have gone cold? No. Don't believe Philip Coury and the AFR, they're running their line. They're trying to, that's how the media works. Oh, they've gone soft on it. They think if they tell that story often enough, it'll become true. I don't think it's true.
And Chris from the Karen branch is cross about his 1% transaction fees.
That's being looked at the moment, actually. Daniel Molino, as Minister for Financial Services, is looking at saying, well, if we're going to move to a cashless society, you can't charge people a fee for using a card. So that's under consideration.
Yeah. I want to ask Peter, because I think this is something we've got to do in the Labor Academy, perhaps again with Chifley, if you can bring in some people. The AI issue is also a fundamental one about democracy, because when you lose copyright, you lose control over your voice and your words. They can be used and twisted in any way at all. And we actually had this battle at the university in the 1990s when David Pennington, who had his virtues, but we had some very bright lawyer who thought, oh, look, we'll make everything that people in the university do, including the students and their notes, be the property of the university intellectually, because the university provides the means for them to be able to do that work. And we had to fight that one because it's fundamental to democracy that you have control over what you've said or the music you've created. And I think what we've got to campaign on is that we lose our national identity. Now, if those silly people walking up and around with the Australian flag draped around their shoulders were campaigning for Australia as a society and for our control over our words and our creativity, I'd be very happy with them. But that's what we're going to lose. And we have already lost a huge amount anyway to the pervasive sort of Hollywood culture of the United States. So it's a real struggle now about I hate the word national identity, but what we are as a society. Peter, your thoughts on AI?
Just a couple of thoughts. The first of which is that AI will be a very big thing for a very long time and will change everyone's work habits in a way that would surprise us when we look back. If I can mention that in my own lifetime in Geelong, there used to be horse-drawn carts would deliver milk and vegetables.
Yep.
When I told my children that, they said, "Dad, were there dinosaurs then?" In my own lifetime, it was 30 years ago that boardrooms were filled only with men, and there were big, thick ashtrays on the table, and all of the men would smoke and make the decisions that were important to us. So that's only 30 years ago. The internet, when it happened really late 90s, divided into a couple of camps. There were those who were paranoid about 1984 and the surveillance and big government and all of the data that they were going to collect on us, and that's happened,
yes,
which is true. But there were also a whole bunch of those men who used to smoke who say, no, I don't need a personal computer on my desk. I won't be one of those people. There are no such people now.
No.
And so that's in the space of a generation. What AI will do is, Emma can say that she hasn't used ChatGPT, but we are using AI. So we will have a summary of this discussion, and there'll be a little machine behind that will actually do dot points. And the summary of the meeting was this. The next steps were this. Our expectations of these things will go up and up and up. During the first digital age, so sort of 2000 to 2010, productivity was lifted by about 1% a year as a result of all of the digital changes. We used to have typing pools. We used to have humans answer phones. And then now we're forced onto the internet to sort of log on and get our own information. But life has got a bit easier. So I think the better estimates are that productivity, if there's a natural 1% a year, it might become 2 or 2.5% a year over the next 10 and 20 years. All sorts of jobs will change. As a lawyer, I used to have fax machines and telexes and photocopy machines and reams of paper. And so all of that's changed. Courts now, you used to wheel in entire folders and you don't do it anymore. You have it all online. All of these things will change in all of the jobs. Health, education, manufacturing, transport. In California, they now have driverless taxis. So I would have said it would take
anytime soon.
Hey, I think California is hard enough to be. Maybe it's better to be in a driverless taxi, but it is happening, and resistance will deplete. But our start point at the moment is not great in terms of technology and democracy. And this can only get worse because it's absolutely the case that you can fool any human. So the Turing test was, can I slide a question under the door? And if you can do it 3 times, you know that the thing on the other side is now as intelligent as a human. That was passed about 10 or 15 years ago. So you can, if I say, look, the reason that, you want to cancel your subscription, do this and this, I'll ask 2 more questions, and you were planning to cancel your subscription, but you've actually just signed up to a more expensive one. So most of us, and I'm saying most humans, are being caught in subscription cancellation traps because, so Adobe, there's a case study written by the Consumer Law Research Center about what Adobe does when you're outraged that you're paying all this money for elements of Adobe you don't need, and then you try to cancel and you finish up paying more. But that's just money. The information is, we are all prone to being fooled by things that we see in social media, in news clips, in texts your friends send us, or text you think has come from your friends. So I'm going to say on this front, we are not well prepared to respond to challenges to our democracy, to disinformation, to digital misconduct. We don't have the appetite to properly regulate. So we're doing these age verification initiatives in relation to kids and the internet, but there's basically an industry code. And I know how industry codes work. They work for the benefit of the industry. So we don't have a good track record of serious crackdown on misconduct at a corporate level. And we tend to say, oh, well, who would you even find? Elon Musk is not going to be brought to a Sydney court in handcuffs. So why even bother? So I think we've got to have a stronger democracy in relation to counter response to the dangers. We have to recognise just how bad we are at the moment with disinformation and fooling the citizenry. We have to, I don't know, just accept that it's going to be pervasive, but then work for how can we intervene. So there's a common theme, I think, to what Emma's saying. We need a little more command in our economy for the benefit of all, because otherwise it's not even a law of the jungle. It's something even worse than that. Trumpism and what's happening in the US, is it the bookmark at the end of the democratic project? Is it the bookend?
Looking that way, isn't it?
So if there's to be a new era, how does that unfold? We are not completely broken yet in our democratic structures, but we could lose it. So I think we've got to be very vigilant about where the things are that we need to get some intervention in. I will shut up now, Janet, but thank you for giving me.
Very much.
On that note, can I give a plug? Because I will always be part of Per Capita. And Rebecca from Per Capita is managing this stream tonight. They have an event on Tuesday evening in Melbourne next week, Policy Hive, which is an initiative that Rebecca and Meredith set up at Per Capita. Can democracy survive AI?
Yeah.
And that's on Tuesday next week in the city with Peter Lewis. So Wednesday evening at the Exford, Rebecca's saying. Sorry, Rebecca. Wednesday evening at the Exford in the city. Can democracy survive AI? Really worthwhile conversation.
Well, look, thank you very much, everyone. And I think Emma's got a final invitation to everyone here, which most of us are old enough to be wanting to be a part of. So off you go.
Absolutely. And before I get there, Geraldine, The Invisible Doctrine by George Monbiot and Peter Hutchison is an excellent book. Everyone should read it. You are the first people to hear that. Of course, the 11th of November this year is the 50th anniversary of the dismissal of the Whitlam government. And the Chifley Research Centre, as the official think tank of the Australian Labor Party, will be hosting some events to mark this occasion. And I'm very pleased, because I'm Melbourne-based and I can make these decisions, that the one on the 11th itself, on the actual anniversary, will be in Melbourne at Victorian Trades Hall. I will be sending out invitations shortly. I will send them to Janet to circulate to this group. But if you're able to join us on the evening of the 11th, I'm doing my best to rope in the Trades Hall choir. There'll be some speech. There'll be a presentation of a new book of the ballads of the dismissal that's been written. We expect to be joined by Wayne Swan and some other senior MPs. So look out for that in your inbox soon. But that's a heads up for all of you. No one else knows that yet.
So can I guarantee that you'll all come? Yes,
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you everyone else. And thank you, Rebecca Connell, who's been sitting there patiently trying to pull this together. I screwed up again at the beginning by having the wrong Zoom address. So even with Rebecca, I still didn't stop my screwings up. But nonetheless, we've got there, and it's been a terrific session, some tremendous thoughts for us all. Can I leave you with something I drew up for students years ago, and one student was very scornful of it, but that to understand how a good society works, it's like a garden. And if you have a drought, the top soil gets into a hard crust. And so even if there's a massive downpour of rain, it all pools at the top and runs off. For a garden to work, you need capillaries that go down to where you can build the groundwater. And so what you need in a society is structures that enable the wealth to filter down. You need a sort of structural filter system, structural plumbing or social plumbing, and that replenishes the water table, and that strong water table keeps the whole system going. But if you don't have that social plumbing, the wealth at the tops pools, runs off, and is squandered. So the student told me I was stupid.
No.
What a ridiculous idea.
Janet.
Sorry.
No, it is a Labor.
I'm sorry, who's that? So I missed who was speaking then.
We call it Academy, I mean.
Oh no, it's Bob Ives.
Well, Janet, as the widow of a hydrologist, I would like to say that analogy is very apt indeed.
Yes. Well, at the time I was illustrating what goes wrong in Pakistan, where people at the very top make a lot of money and the rest of the country is absolutely desiccated and impoverished. But it applies to us. And so what Labor's mission is, or social democratic mission, is to build the social plumbing that hydrates the whole system.
Nice.
And to get people to get a sense that the whole system, the well-being of the Commonwealth, depends on that fair sort of sharing. Now, Lachlan McCall's creeping up my screen. Do you want to say something, Lachlan?
Oh, no, thank you. No, thanks, Jen. I'm just clapping.
Yeah, that's all right. Thank you.
And Rebecca has put into the chat there the link to that event next week about AI and democracy. So
thank you very much. I'll take a copy of that. Thank you all. Have a good night. And thank you, Emma.
See you soon.
Well done. Thank you.
Keep up the great work, everyone.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye.